want to introduce you all to Dr. Jori Fleisher, joining us from Rush in Chicago. Welcome, Dr. Fleisher. And I know that, in your slides, it has a little bit about your credentials and where you practice, but tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into movement disorders and, becoming a neurologist?
Sure. So thank you so much, Andrea, for having me, for the invitation, and to Amanda on the back end for keeping everything running smoothly, and to all of you for joining from uh, Pennsylvania and Virginia. And I see lots of people. So I'm coming to you from Chicago, and I decided to go into neurology because I come from a non-medical family, but we had multiple family members who I was very, very close to who had different neurologic disorders and diseases, and actually no movement disorders when I was a kid, but dementia and neuromuscular problems and both sudden and chronic things. And as I grew up and tried to understand what was going on in family members who I loved, and I started hearing kind of the stories about what diagnosis was like, or how many times people were told, this is what we have, we have nothing to offer. It just became incredibly frustrating and hard for me to understand that there was this whole specialty, and there was, how could we make a diagnosis and then have nothing? And thankfully, neurology has come a really long way since then. But that was the interest, and I had the privilege of working with and doing research with a cognitive neurologist when I was an undergrad, and he actually was working specifically with people with Parkinson's dementia. And I had volunteered at nursing homes, seen people with Alzheimer's, and kind of got used to seeing folks with that. But then we were talking with someone with Parkinson's dementia, and my mentor, my boss, had this very dry sense of humor, and he made some like snarky comment. And the person with Parkinson's snapped right back, even though he had a masked face and he kind of seemed a little bit withdrawn. He was absolutely there, and his sense of humor was 100%. And it just shook me to my core, um, how easy it was to write someone off, and how very much that person was there. And that was kind of it. I found my people.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's a great story and absolutely can relate. And I bet all of us can too, who've sat in support groups and been part of this community. Well, today we are going to be talking about Parkinson's staging and what we can learn from staging, what's missing. And I think we're ready to dive in. If you want to pull up your slides and take it away.
Thank you so much. So let's see. All right. Everyone see okay?
Looks great.
Thumbs up. Beautiful. All right. So I know this sounds like a really scary topic, but I hope, number one, kudos for the courage to show up, or kudos for the courage to watch after the fact. But I'm really, really passionate about making sure that everyone with Parkinson's is getting the care that they need and that they deserve. And for a long time, that hasn't always been the case. And so, what I hope we can talk about today is what caring for the later stages can teach us, for everyone, about thriving with Parkinson's today. So I am a movement disorders neurologist here at Rush in Chicago, and I lead our Parkinson Center of Excellence. I also lead our Lewy Body Dementia Center of Excellence and our CurePSP Center of Care. And I have the privilege of directing an interdisciplinary clinic where I work together with a neuropalliative care doc, a nurse, a social worker, and a dietitian, and our fellows, our trainees, to work all together to try to help people with Parkinson's and related conditions live their best lives. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the stages of Parkinson's and who we are missing, and then a few different ways that we can kind of learn about some of these later stages. So I'm going to walk you through some research and projects that I've been privileged to do, including meeting people in their homes and what we can learn from home visits, talking a little bit about this confusing chicken and egg under an umbrella analogy, and then what can we do for caregivers or care partners. And I will use the terms caregivers and care partners and carers interchangeably. Some people strongly identify with one and dislike another, but no one is the same about that. So if I use a term you don't like, I'm sorry, I will try to use them all. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the stages of Parkinson's and kind of where we are. So what we know is that number one risk factor for Parkinson's is age. So as people age, the risk of developing Parkinson's increases. And thankfully, more people are living longer, which means that we have more people with Parkinson's. And it's not just age that's increasing that prevalence. There are other things contributing. The number is kind of going up higher than we would expect if it was just age alone. But it also means that the more people with Parkinson's who are out there, who are living longer and living longer with Parkinson's, that means we have more people living into later stages of disease. And what we know is that as time goes on, so as a movement disorders doc, I am trained to look and see, does someone have the features to make a diagnosis of Parkinson's? What are those things? Bradykinesia, slowness of movement. Those are those taps that we love to do in the clinic. In real life, this is it slower when you're brushing your teeth? If you start on one side and it gets crampier or more effortful or smaller movements on the other side. Does someone have rigidity or stiffness of the muscles? Do they have a tremor, usually on one side more than the other? If you have that bradykinesia, the slowness, smallness of movements, and stiffness, rigidity, tremor, or trouble with balance, we say you have Parkinson's, Parkinsonism. But then there are all of these other symptoms. And as time goes on, this little blue triangle in the middle here with the bradykinesia, rigidity, and tremor, that is no longer kind of the thing that's shaping your experience. It's all of these other symptoms that creep in. It's pain, potentially, fatigue, cognitive changes, urinary, bowel changes, blood pressure issues, trouble with swallowing and falls, all of these other things, which no one gets all of the things, number one, but we want to know about those things so that if they happen, we recognize them, we know which healthcare professionals to direct our questions to, and we can get treatment for it. However, when people ask me, well, what stage am I at? I tell them, well, I got good news and bad news. We have a staging system, and it's not great. This is our staging system. It's called the Hoehn-Yahr scale, and it really is 5 categories. Even though we assign them numbers, they're not equally spaced or anything. So stage 1, often people aren't even diagnosed or they may not get to care. Stage 1 means someone has mild symptoms just on one side of the body. Stage 2 means symptoms are on both sides of the body, but balance is fine. They're not falling, they're not tipping, none of that. Stage 3 is when we start to see balance becoming involved. Maybe the person's falling, maybe they're having some almost falls, some near misses, catching themselves on the couch or a wall. Stage 4 is someone who is able to be up and around, but needs a walker or a cane for help getting around independently. And stage 5 is someone who is dependent on a wheelchair or in bed unless someone else is helping them. So if you look at this 5-point staging system, you can ask yourself, well, she said she's going to talk about later stages or advanced. Where's the line for advanced? Right? So you can even throw into the chat, what numbers do you think are advanced? Let's see if I can see the chat. Andrea says 5. Solid thought. 4+ from Doris. Yeah. So Doris, Andrea, I agree with you. In my mind, I think about stages 4 and 5. However, what's really interesting, and I use that term generously, is that in many studies that look at advanced Parkinson's, that's in the title, trial of whatever drug or whatever intervention, if you look at the big main table, table 1, who is in the study, the average stage in that advanced study is often a 3. And they've excluded people at 4 and 5. And so if we are saying that stage 3 out of 5 is advanced, I ask you, what are we calling people who are at stages 4 and 5? And for way too long, we haven't been calling them anything because we've effectively forgotten that they exist or stopped acknowledging them. And if folks are not being represented in research, then we don't know what to do. We don't know as movement disorders, neurologists, what we're supposed to do. What are the best practices? And so here's just one example of that. This was a really great landmark study. It's an old study by now. Came out in 2009, but this is the Priamo study. And this was a survey. So it didn't require people to come into the office a bunch of different times. It literally was a survey that said, do you have any of the following symptoms in these different categories, the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's? And they surveyed over 1,000 people with Parkinson's, 1,072 to be exact. And they had to group together 49 people in stages 4 and 5 to come up with this category. They didn't even have enough people in stage 4 or 5 alone to run the numbers. They had to combine them. And they had 49 people out of 1,072 that were in those two stages combined. That's just over 4%. And what we see here is that in every one of these domains, gastrointestinal, so GI, constipation, pain, urinary symptoms, the numbers in parentheses are the prevalence. How common is it that someone said, yes, I have some of those symptoms? And people with advanced disease are far more likely to have all of those symptoms, but yet they're excluded from lots of research. And so they've got the most burden of symptoms, but they're not represented. We're not asking them what to do. So here is one way of thinking that I think is really helpful. And this came from a group in Europe. And they've kind of taken the approach of saying whether a person has Parkinson's disease, or maybe they've been diagnosed with dementia with Lewy bodies, or maybe they have one of the atypical Parkinsonism syndromes like PSP or MSA. We do a lot of splitting in medicine. But if we look at those folks combined, and we say, what about late stage Parkinsonism? By which they mean folks who mobility wise fit into that hone and yar 4 or 5 category. Either they're up and walking around with a walker or a cane, or with the assistance of someone else. And they have a lot of slowness. The rigidity may or may not be there, but that's not a big driver of their issues. What is a big driver of their issues are trouble with walking, freezing of gait, where people are getting stuck, their feet won't move on them. They're falling a lot. They're having trouble swallowing. Things are going down the wrong pipe, or they're coughing frequently. And a lot of the non-motor symptoms. So trouble with sleep in all the different ways, trouble staying asleep, sleeping all day, all of these things. Urinary issues, urinary frequency, urinary tract infections, incontinence, dementia, hallucinations and delusions, or what we call psychosis, depression, and skeletal changes, meaning someone who's bent over and stooped. They say that all of these symptoms kind of mark someone with late stage Parkinsonism. So instead of worrying about the label, since we can't tell 100% which disease it is unless we look at the brain under a microscope, this kind of category gives us a little bit more to work with. And what we know, if we look at this kind of silly graph towards the right, is that people with early Parkinson's, stages 1, 2, 3, they are represented well in research. They make it to clinical care. But as time goes on and we get towards more moderate and then this late stage area, the place where these folks show up are in studies, in research reports talking about why people with Parkinson's are hospitalized, why people with Parkinson's pass and where they are when they die, and what causes people to be placed into a nursing facility. That's where folks are represented. And I would submit to you that there is more that we can do between seeing people in clinic when they're early and looking backwards in time after they're gone. So here are some of those things, is how do we do this? Where are folks and how do we reach them? So we have to think a little bit more creatively because this has been such a problem in Parkinson's research for too long. So there's a great study that came out in 2020, and this was looking at US Medicare recipients, 35 million people who were age 60 and older, and they followed them for 7 years. And really the question was just, you're living out in the community at home at time 1, 7 years later, where are you? And so what they found was among this group, by the 7-year mark, about 23.7% had passed. And again, this includes people ages 60 and over. So some of these folks were 90 at baseline. 3.4% or 1.2 million people went from being in their home, being out in the community, to being in a nursing facility over 7 years. And you might think, well, that's not so bad. People with Parkinson's go to nursing homes, and that's true. And many people do very, very well. However, the data that we have about people with Parkinson's in nursing homes is that not everyone does well. And about 37% of people with Parkinson's in a nursing home, only 37%, just over a third, still have access to a neurologist in the year before they pass. It's often a reason why people get disconnected from neurologic care. But also among these 35 million people is 4.5 million people over the course of 7 years became homebound. And what do I mean by that? So Medicare has a very formal definition of homebound. It doesn't mean that you cannot absolutely leave your house. It means, here's the quotation, it is a considerable and taxing effort to leave the home because of a medical condition. And doing so requires either the assistance of another person or an assistive device like a cane or a walker or a wheelchair or special transportation. So you can still go to the doctor, go to a house of worship, go to a family birthday party. It just requires extra help. So among 35 million people, 4.5 million became homebound within 7 years. And people who are homebound are at very high risks of certain things. So 43% are impoverished. They fall below the federal poverty line. 39% are home alone. They don't have a care partner. 39% have 5 or more medical problems. And about 30% have dementia. And you will notice, I hope quickly, that these numbers add up to way more than 100. So we are pulling from columns A and columns B for a lot of people. The other thing that we know is we can ask, I told you that, we have data in this red corner about where do people with Parkinson's pass and have we made headway? And by headway, what I think about is if we ask anyone, Parkinson's or not, when it's your time, where would you prefer to pass away? In a nursing facility, in a hospital bed, or at home? And the vast majority of Americans say, I would prefer to be home. So what actually happens? Well, we've seen progress, but from 2003 to 2017, we saw that people with Parkinson's were passing more than half the time in a nursing home. That decreased to 42% by 2017. We're down to 9% of people passing in a hospital. 32%, nearly a third, are passing at home. And about 8.6% are passing in an inpatient hospice unit. But that's a very small fraction of hospice. Most hospice is delivered at home. So anyone want to guess what percent of people with Parkinson's pass in their home with hospice services in place? Throw in a number into the chat. Anyone brave enough? Amanda says 10%. Thank you, Amanda. That was very brave. Any other numbers? It is about 4%. 4%. Even though most people say that they would want to be home and comfortable and surrounded by those they love. And kind of the way to get there is really home with hospice. We're at 4%. We can do better. So I am really lucky to have an amazing team. And we joke that not only is what we do not rocket science, it's not even like low-hanging fruit. We are picking up the perfect apple that just fell off the tree and is on the ground. Like you don't even have to reach for it. We are looking at really simple things, novel interventions to reach people with advanced or late-stage Parkinson's and related conditions to improve quality of life in those folks today. And some of the important questions that we need to ask is then, who are these people and who is supporting them? What are their symptoms and their needs? Why have they fallen through the cracks? And how do we re-engage people, not only in care, but in research and in advocacy? Because I get the privilege of going to Washington, D.C. and trying to convince our lawmakers how important it is to do things for people with Parkinson's. And you know what's even more compelling? You, not me. Someone with Parkinson's saying, this is what I struggle with. But the unifying hypothesis that we have is that human connection is the secret. Human connection is required to reach people who've fallen out of the loop of care. And interventions that leverage human connection have the power to change trajectories and health outcomes. So let me tell you a little bit about what I mean. I was lucky enough when I finished fellowship, I started to realize that I was answering phone calls as a fellow for people with advanced or late stage Parkinson's who were describing symptoms, or more often their care partners were describing symptoms on the phone that I had not encountered in my training to be a movement disorder specialist. So I hadn't seen people with symptoms as significant as those who were calling in. And fast forward, I wound up at New York University as a faculty member, and my division chief said, we have an amazingly generous donor who has said, if you are losing track of your sweethearts, go out and find them. What would that look like? Build a program. And so we built a program of interdisciplinary home visits where myself or our fellow, but much more importantly, a nurse and a social worker, always went out as a trio to people all across New York City, all 5 boroughs of New York City. And I did all the things that I would usually do in an office visit. We tapped, we clapped, I asked about medications and symptoms and when are things wearing off and what's kicking in and all of this. But the meat of this was what my colleagues did. Because instead of saying, are you taking your medicines the way you're supposed to? And everyone goes, yes, doctor, yes, I am. That's not, that doesn't help anyone. My nurse said, take me to your medicines. Let me see how this is actually working. And for some people, that's a beautifully organized tackle box with the 7 different compartments every day or whatever it is. But for some people, it's a gallon Ziploc bag into which their loved ones have dumped all of the bottles. And at a certain point every day, they go, oh, I think it's time to take that little white pill or the little yellow pill, and they fish around and they pull that out. And you can imagine that that might lead to complications. So we looked at how people were taking their meds, not just if. We also asked for permission to walk around the home and look for safety issues, like the throw rug that's a family heirloom that someone keeps tripping over. With permission, we asked if we could open the pantry and the fridge. Because for all of the time that Uncle Google spends worrying about protein and levodopa, what's even more important is, do you have protein in your house? Are you eating? And if you're not, how can we fix that? Because that is far more important. And while my nurse was doing that and actually checking true blood pressure, sitting and standing, our social worker was sitting with the care partner, if there was one, and saying, what services are you receiving? What services could be helpful? Who are your people? Who is supporting you and your loved one? Do you have a faith community? Can we get them involved? Do you have other family members, even if they're long distance? Can we rope them in with calls or ordering Instacart, whatever that is? How can we help support you and build a scaffold around you? And what we found was, even though folks may have been lost to clinical care, we recruited people into this program who were missing appointments, who were being hospitalized. Folks not only said, yes, absolutely, you can come, but you can come repeatedly. Keep the visits coming. And we followed people over time. So we had some folks where we saw them, 10 home visits over the course of a couple of years. We did over 400 visits in New York City. And what we found, seeing this very late stage population, is yes, there can be many symptoms as Parkinson's advances. No one needs to read this complicated slide. I'm showing it to you, and the point is it's complicated. There are lots of symptoms. But we published this in actually a textbook of geriatrics to show, just because there are all of these symptoms, for every single one, we have non-pharmacologic, non-medication treatments and medication treatments that can help with them. Table took up 2 slides, okay? 2 pages of a giant textbook to say there are all these things. And I promise I will share the slides. So you can take this to your healthcare professional and go, this blonde doctor said there's something you can do about pain. There is. You can advocate for yourself, please, and bring this into them. But the point is, just because there are so many things, there are also things that we can do. And it's not always a pill, and sometimes that's great. And sometimes it may just take a pill, and we have those. What did we find with doing this? Right? So, to one extent, I kind of would describe this to people who said, well, Dr. Fleischer, this is very sweet and very warm and fuzzy, but no one is going to have home visits available for people with Parkinson's across the country. This is a pipe dream. And I said, oh, yes, I'm very aware. That's not the point. I wish we were in a healthcare system where we could have home visits like this for everyone with Parkinson's. But my point is, they are out there. My point is that my colleagues would tell me, Jori, if someone is so sick, if they are so advanced that they can't come in, what do you really think you're going to change? And that's where we needed to prove something. And so what we proved not only was people were out there and people would answer the door and let in a team of women barging in and nosing around in all of their stuff. But here's what we found is in the first group, when we did this in New York, this is one of the oldest groups of people with Parkinson's to be studied. Also, in far too many studies of people with Parkinson's, overwhelmingly 90+% of the population is white. And yet, in our New York cohort, we had 7% of individuals who identified as Black, 7% Asian, 15% as Hispanic or Latinx, a much more diverse population and willing to let people in. We also saw that about 37, 38% were Hoehn-Yahr stage 4 at visit 1, 32% were Hoehn-Yahr stage 5 at visit 1, and then we followed them out from there. What did we do? Besides all of those symptoms that we were treating, in most of our folks at most visits, we were connecting them with other services in the community. And you might think that this is very specific to New York City. There's lots of resources. Yes, and it's not just New York City specific because there are resources and physical therapy and PT, OT, speech, friendly visiting services in communities all over the US. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of digging to find them. What we also found interestingly was that even though we think about Parkinson's as being more common in men, which it is, when we look at the more advanced population, and particularly our homebound population, women outnumbered our men, and our women were more likely to be alone. Either no caregiver at all or a part-time paid caregiver, but without a spouse, significant other, adult child care partner. And that's kind of a new and interesting finding. What did we find over time as we followed people in this New York cohort? Well, we need to take a step back and think about what do we see when we follow people with Parkinson's over time in every other study. And that is that this is a progressive condition, right? And so over time, Parkinson's gets worse. And over time, as that slope of Parkinson's getting worse, whatever that is for any individual, quality of life usually follows it. And we've kind of assumed that we can't change that. And that those two slopes are yoked together. But what we found in this first study, even though it was small, was that while Parkinson's was getting worse, quality of life stayed the same. And that was really encouraging to us. That made us think there's something here. The downside was among those folks who had a care partner strain worsened over 1 year. And that's what had been seen in every other study. So maybe we can change quality of life. And if we can do that, we'll come back to what we can do with caregivers. So I told you maybe all these findings were just specific to New York City. And we didn't have a control group. And Jori, no one can do this everywhere. This is unsustainable. And so with funding from the National Institutes of Health, we launched a study, we moved to Chicago, and we launched a study where we enrolled and followed 65 people with Parkinson's and a care partner for 4 home visits over the course of a year. Parkinson's with or without Parkinson's dementia. We took people within a 50-mile radius of Rush, which includes urban, suburban, rural areas. My team got stuck and was late one day to a home visit because there was a tortoise in the road. We pared down our in-person team so that our nurse always went out in person with a research coordinator, and they brought an iPad with them. So I was always here in my office. This was pre-COVID. We were doing telemedicine before COVID. And I stayed here. The social worker went out, but we brought the internet to our folks. And we got a control group. It's not a perfect control group, but if anyone is familiar with the Parkinson's Outcome Project, it's a registry of folks who are seen at Parkinson's Foundation Centers of Excellence. You would know if you were part of it because they say once a year, hey, can you fill out your surveys? Can we do a couple of extra things? And they follow people annually over time. Not a ton of questions, not a huge amount of data, but it's enough. And we said, all right, we're going to have 65 people with Parkinson's. We will just provide their age, plus or minus 5 years, their gender identity, and their hone and yar stage, which is only going to be a 3, 4, or 5, and say, hey, Parkinson's Foundation, can you give us anyone that matches those criteria? And we'll see how they do over a course of a year compared to our folks. So we did all the same stuff that we did in New York. I tapped and clapped and we checked vitals and we talked about medications and we walked around the house and we asked about safety. We talked with the care partners about who is supporting you and what else do you need. And we tried to provide that. And I'll get back to what we did for our care partners, but we added something special in for our care partners between the second and third home visit. So what did we find? Well, when we tried to get that control group that I mentioned, we got some bad news, which was even though you've only got 65 folks and we've got over 13,000 people followed over time, most of your people have no match. And that's proof of exactly this issue, is that people come in and they see their movement disorders neurologist, they see their neurologist from year 1 to year 2, they're at stages 1, 2, 2 for a couple of years, stage 3, stage 3, stage 3, and then we lose them to follow-up. And that doesn't mean that we have lost them. So we said, okay, fine. Just give us folks who are at stage 3 and have at least a follow-up visit a year later. And we will compare apples to oranges. And what we found was, yeah, this is apples to oranges because our home participants on average were age 79. Our control group was an average of age 70. Those 9 years make a big difference. Our folks were more likely to be non-white. So about 15% of our population, 14.3%, identified as African American, 11% as Asian, and it was far less in the registry group. And people might say, well, you had those numbers in New York and now you're in Chicago. Those are very diverse areas, Jori. That's why. Nope. Because we looked at our clinic and we said, from the people we could have recruited from, do those numbers match? And what we found actually was no. Our people who said yes to being part of home visits were more likely to be non-white than the clinic itself. So we were concentrating folks who are non-white were more likely to fall out of the loop of care and yet say yes to being part of this. And just proof that these are apples and oranges that we're talking about, in our homebound group, 63% at visit 1 were at stage 4, meaning that they were walking with a walker or a cane. And 15% were at stage 5. And 85% of our control group was at stage 3. So very, very different groups. And what did we find? This is a super busy slide, but the take-home message here is using a Parkinson-specific quality of life measure. If we look at the right side of the screen at our control group, higher numbers are worse quality of life. And so we see in the control group what we see in every other study, which is that as time goes on, quality of life gets a little bit worse over the course of a year. But if we look at the left side, in our home visit folks, quality of life stayed the same. And that's actually a significant difference. And moreover, if we look at the different domains that make up quality of life, things like mobility, ability to do activities of daily living, cognitive changes, bodily discomfort, in almost every one of these, in our control group, things get worse over time. And that's reflected in the total score. But in certain areas in our homebound folks getting home visits for a year, they got better. They got better in the form of a progressive neurodegenerative disease. We do not always need to accept that everything is going to get worse. There are things that we can change. And how did we change that, by the way, the bodily discomfort? I refer you back to those slides with the ugly blue tables, because sometimes things as simple as treating pain with ibuprofen, with Bengay, and putting it into the medication schedule makes a huge difference. And that arthritic pain or the Parkinson's crampiness gets better. People can walk, they can exercise, they can do what they need to do. So I want to talk a little bit about cognition and this Parkinson's Lewy body thing. If you are confused by what is Lewy body and how does this relate to Parkinson's, you're not alone. I am confused by this most days, okay? Because we talk about Parkinson's and cognitive change or Parkinson's and dementia. And when people hear the word dementia, they think Alzheimer's. So on the right side of the screen, here's what we know about Alzheimer's. It's really memory loss, trouble remembering short-term things. So memory loss is very prominent. People repeat questions. They don't remember the conversation that they just had. They're forgetting names of people. They don't tend to have hallucinations, but they do forget people who are familiar to them. They're less likely to have sleep issues. They're less likely to have trouble with blood pressure and things like that. And Alzheimer's is more common in women. However, there is this other flavor of dementia, and it's the second most common form of dementia, even though one of my mentors says it's the biggest disease you've never heard of. And that we term Lewy body dementia. And it's less memory issues, but it's more attention, judgment, visual perception issues, and memory loss may happen, but that's a later feature. People can have hallucinations. They may misidentify people who are familiar to them, but they don't forget their loved ones. And there's a lot of sleep issues and autonomic nervous system changes, the stuff we take for granted, blood pressure control, bowel, bladder control, that goes along with this. And so I really like stupid analogies. So here's the best way that I've come up with to understand Lewy body dementia. And what I mean by this is a chicken and an egg problem under an umbrella. Okay. So Parkinsonism, the slowness, the stiffness, the tremor, the balance changes. The Parkinsonism is our chicken. Okay. The dementia that I just described, attention, concentration, decision-making, planning of complex stuff, visuospatial issues, hallucinations, and moment by moment, hour by hour kind of fluctuations. This is the type of dementia that we're talking about. That's our egg, okay? So there are people who develop the Parkinsonism, the chicken, and at least a year later, but in most cases, 10, 15, 20 years later, develop this flavor of dementia. And we then say that that person has Parkinson's disease dementia. It's not a different diagnosis. It's like saying Parkinson's disease constipation. It's part of it. Not everyone gets it, but it's part of this. However, there are folks who didn't read that textbook. There are folks who get this cognitive change, the dementia, first, and later go on to develop symptoms of Parkinsonism. And then there are also folks who get both around the same time or within a year of each other. And if you're in this group, we say that that person has dementia with Lewy bodies. And if that's not confusing enough, here we go. Whether you got the chicken and then the egg, or the egg and then the chicken, or the chicken and the egg showed up in the same basket, if both are present, we say that that person has Lewy body dementia. So all Parkinson's disease dementia is Lewy body dementia. It's not a separate diagnosis. It's not another thing on the list. It's just another way of framing it, and people need better ways to have these terms, okay? But I want to think about Lewy body dementia for a minute, because there are a lot of things that are really important for us to know here. And that is when we look at Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia together, we have a lot of information about what leads to folks, especially in later stages, winding up in the hospital. And a lot of these things have been thought about as inevitable. This is what happens, and we can't do anything to change it. Falls, urinary infections, incontinence, dehydration, and metabolic problems, sodium, potassium levels being off because you're dehydrated, neuropsychiatric issues like hallucinations, delusions, agitation, and caregiver strain. And I put that in bold because people often look at that and they're like, really? If we account for all of these other things, pound for pound, two identical twins with Parkinson's, same symptoms, not that that would ever happen, but let's pretend we have two identical people, but one has a care partner who is at the end of their rope. They don't have any other support. They are on their own. That person's loved one is far more likely to wind up being hospitalized or placed in a nursing home than their identical twin, just based on the caregiver strain alone. And when a person with Parkinson's or Lewy body is hospitalized, they stay in the hospital for longer, they have extra complications, and they're more likely to be discharged to a nursing facility rather than back home. So here is this really simple hypothesis. Many of these things, falls, urinary tract infections, the neuropsychiatric issues, we can treat these when we catch them early, or we can prevent them. But doing that requires an educated, engaged, observant, supported care partner. So what do we know about our care partners? And if people have not seen the movie Encanto, this is Louisa from the Disney movie Encanto. Strongly recommend. Our Parkinson's and Lewy body caregivers have big Louisa energy. You are carrying the world on your shoulders, and you're often cast as a supporting character, as a side role, okay? We see you. So we know that over 83% of people with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia rely on unpaid caregiving from family members. And if we added that all up, it's 18.5 billion hours of care that if we paid for it, which we don't, but if we did, that would work out to about 232 billion with a B dollars annually. We know that Parkinson's and Lewy body caregivers have higher caregiver strain, caregiver burden, and depression than caregivers to people with Alzheimer's. Why is that? Because it's not just cognitive. It's not just someone repeating themselves in conversation. It's attention, it's concentration, it's from one moment to the next. It's very hard to predict. And it's the Parkinsonism, it's the falls, it's the freezing of gait, it's the stumbling, it's the hallucinations, delusions, confusion, apathy, the constipation and not knowing, can we go out? Is this place going to have a bathroom? Will I be able to go in with them? What's going on? All of that makes it really, really challenging to be a care partner. And if you needed further proof of that, here's this very ugly table. All this is we were writing a paper and we said, Lewy body and Parkinson's care partners, we think have worse health issues than other folks. And we had a reviewer come back and say, basically, prove it. And so we asked 182 care partners. We gave them a simple survey that just said, do you have any of the following medical problems? High blood pressure, depression, back pain, other stuff. And this light gray bar, the parentheses show you the percentage of all the caregivers who said, yes, I got that. But if we go across the rows, the dark gray boxes tell you that for that age group, the care partners had higher percentages of that issue than we see for age alone. So is it more common to have high blood pressure as you get older? Yes. Does age explain this? No. Our Lewy body and Parkinson's care partners have higher rates of high blood pressure than they should have just based on age alone. They also have higher rates of depression and back pain and all kinds of other medical issues. They have higher constipation themselves than the person with Parkinson's. Why? There's so much here. And we know that these care partners are strained and that rubs off on what happens to their loved ones. And unfortunately, for way too many years, there have been no effective interventions for Parkinson's or Lewy body care partners. And in dementia in general, which is mostly Alzheimer's, there are some interventions that have been effective, but they've really been costly and unsustainable. And so as a clinician, seeing families in clinic every week, people often come to me and they go, okay, Dr. Fleischer, you can send me someone, right? And I have to break their heart and say, paid caregivers are not covered by insurance. They are not part of Medicare. They're not even part of hospice. This is for most people out of pocket, extremely expensive. Caregivers are in high demand and low supply. there's a very high turnover rate, and they often have no training in Parkinson's, in cognitive changes, in end-of-life care. So this is not a sustainable option for most people. And I feel like for way too long, the answer has been like, what do we do? Because the cavalry is not coming, right? And I promise not to leave you on that note, okay? So what do? We knew from our home visits in New York that while the home visits were helping our people with Parkinson's, it was insufficient to change caregiver strain. So I told you we needed to add something else in. So we looked around and said, what are other people doing? What is working in any other condition that we might be able to apply here? And in Alzheimer's, people had started testing out this idea of finding care partners who are experienced and pairing them up in some way with a care partner who is newer on the journey. And basically saying, would you just talk with each other? And they did. And so since that time and that early work sort of in the early 2010s, this is used now on college campuses. They pair up a freshman coming in, with a junior instead of pairing them up with like an alumni who doesn't know anything. And so people have used this among trauma survivors, among younger adults with neurologic disorders. And I think to me, the most compelling example of how this can work is one could imagine that if you've been a care partner and you've lost a loved one, you might want to run screaming in the opposite direction and never be part of that care community again. And that would be justified. And I cannot imagine a population where that would be more justified than parents who have lost a child to cancer. And yet, they have shown that parents who have lost a child to cancer will willingly put themselves back in that space and mentor and coach parents who are going through that with their own child. So if it will work there, how could it not work in Parkinson's? And so that's what we set out to test. So we said, we're going to do these home visits, but we're going to nest in there this idea of peer mentoring. So between that second and third home visit, when we finished up our second home visit, we were giving them all their instructions and everything. We also wrote down, hey, you're going to get a call this week from Bob. Bob's been a care partner to their loved one with Parkinson's. Just pick up the phone. We're not telling you how long to talk, just every week for the next 16 weeks, barring illness or whatever, life happens. Talk with them. Let us know how it goes. We gave them a very simple little handbook to help guide, but it was really not very much. And what we found was that in the control group who had caregivers, and I already told you that control group was younger and healthier, their Parkinson's was earlier, caregiver strain got worse. But in our home visit caregivers who got peer mentoring, compared to the caregivers who hadn't gotten peer mentoring in New York, those caregivers got worse. Here, with peer mentoring added in, they did not change significantly. Caregiver strain stabilized over a year. They actually talked 11 weeks out of 16 on average. They talked for 30 minutes a week, and we didn't tell them how long to talk. And satisfaction was about 91%. So this made us think that we could do better. So full disclosure, I told you that I grew up around a lot of folks with neurologic disease, and my main inspirations were my grandparents. My paternal grandparents raised my Aunt Kim, who had severe neurologic injury. And I have this core memory of my grandmother teaching me the word persevere as a 4-year-old. And if we look at the dictionary definition, the definition of persevere is to continue in a course of action, even in the face of difficulty or with little or no prospect of success. And if you want to get a grant, you usually need to come up with a very creative acronym. So we came up with a creative acronym of learning to persevere, where persevere stands for, you got to squint a little, peer mentor support and caregiver education in Lewy body dementia. Why Lewy body dementia and not just Parkinson's? Because for reasons that are a little bit confusing, the National Institutes of Health will fund more stuff if it falls under the umbrella of Alzheimer's disease and related disorders than not. And Lewy body dementia, they have decided, falls under that umbrella, but plain old Parkinson's without dementia is left out in the rain. And so we said, all right, let's increase the chance that we can get everybody that we want to reach and that this actually gets funded. And so we opened it up to Lewy body dementia. And what we did was we took Those folks who'd been part of home visits, we asked them if they'd be willing to come back and do some focus groups and tell us what was that mentoring process like? What was helpful, what wasn't? And if we were to create a handbook, like, do you need that? Maybe there's enough out there on the interwebs and you don't need any more to read. And what else would be helpful? And they had thoughts. We made it entirely virtual. And we partnered with Lewy Body Dementia Association and Parkinson's Foundation. They sent this out to their email and Facebook groups. We recruited and trained 36 new mentors from all across the US and 30 new mentees. And even though other peer mentoring studies had said, it doesn't really matter if you try to match people up, if they've been through the same rough journey, it's basically the same. And the feedback that we got when we did focus groups was, if I'm an adult child care partner to a parent, that feels different than being a spouse or significant other care partner. And I would want to talk with someone who's been in my shoes. And so we asked our folks, what is most important to you about who you're matched with? And we're not quite Tinder, but we tried to make nice matches between people and meet people where they were with who they wanted to be matched with. And we asked them to talk with each other for 16 weeks. And we gave them a curriculum. So I said, we asked people what they wanted to hear about. Oh, did they tell us? They said, yeah, Jori, there's a lot online. And I don't know what I can trust. And I don't know what applies to my loved one. And I don't know what order to read things in, or like, it's just too much. And so we realized that there was a whole group of topics that had to do with symptoms, but there was also a whole group of topics that had to do with, am I the only one that feels angry all the time? Am I the only one that feels like I'm doing this wrong? Why does my family not see what I'm doing? Why does no one get this? Here's what I wish I had known. And so we built the curriculum to have both knowledge topics about Lewy body and Parkinson's, but also social support and caregiving topics. We trained our mentors on Zoom. It was all online from the comfort of your own home. We matched them up and we supported our mentors. And what did we find? Despite active caregiving demands or bereavement, many of our mentors had lost their loved ones. Our caregivers prioritized learning to persevere. What do I mean by that? We had 30 pairs. So again, this was a small study. Wait for it and get into the big study. 30 pairs, over 400 calls, over 16 weeks. On average, these folks spoke 15 weeks out of 16 compared to 11 before. And they talked for an average of 45 minutes a week. And again, we did not tell people how long to speak. Far be it from me to try to add something to your schedule. We know how busy our care partners are. 100% found this iteration helpful and would recommend it to others. And in addition to the fact that they increased their knowledge and they increased their attitudes towards caring for people with dementia and their confidence and their skills, what I think is the most compelling, and I think what helped us get the big grant, is that I told you before that the cavalry hasn't been coming, right? So we asked our mentors, we know this could be triggering and difficult. Would you do this again? And 90% said yes. And we asked our mentees, who were still actively caregiving for a loved one, you've just gone through this for 16 weeks. If you had the option, if we had the funding, would you do it again as a mentee with another mentor? Would you go like, thanks, I'm good for right now? Or would you ask to be a mentor and pay it forward? And 40% said, I'd like another go round with another mentor. This is great. 10% were like, I'm good for right now. Leave me alone. But 50% said, I am ready to pay this forward. So maybe this whole time, as we've been waiting for the cavalry to show up, the cavalry is all of us. It is all of you. It is support groups. It is this community with the unbelievable amount of lived wisdom and experience that you have, and you may not even realize how much you have. To be able to share that with other folks on this journey actually makes a huge difference. It changes people's knowledge. It changes their confidence. And that led us to be able to ask, can this change things in a big way? And can this change the lives of our people with Parkinson's and Lewy body? So I'm going to skip over some of the other slides. We tested and incorporated other things, and people said, this is a nice giant book that you made, but it would be great if it was a website. It would be great if it was a PDF. We did all those things. And fast forward to 2023, finding out that even though the NIH doesn't traditionally fund a lot of Lewy body research, doesn't traditionally fund a lot of caregiver research, they funded this. And so we have the first of its kind national. If you are watching this in a US state or a US territory, Puerto Rico, Guam, Virgin Islands, I'm looking at you. We have resources for you. We just need to get the word out. But any of the 50 states or territories, you are eligible to participate. This is testing this educational program for family caregivers, family care partners of folks with Parkinson's and cognitive change, Parkinson's and hallucinations, Parkinson's and dementia, or dementia with Lewy bodies, Lewy body dementia. If you are under that umbrella, we see you and this is for you. You can be a current caregiver, you can be a past caregiver. Our experienced caregivers get trained to be peer mentors, and our earlier in the journey care partners are randomly assigned to one of two groups, but everyone gets something. So all participation is virtual. This is on your own time. If you're interested, this QR code, it takes you right to the website. Thank you, Amanda, put into the chat, the website. It's all in there. This will all be in the slides too. But everyone, we don't have a traditional control group. That's not okay with my soul. Everyone gets 12 weeks of a curriculum that's been specifically designed for Parkinson's and Lewy body care partners. So what does that actually look like? If you go to the link, just so people aren't scared, we had to add in one of these annoying tell us you're not a robot boxes because robots were trying to enter the study. So there we go. It will take you to a website. You can watch a video with more information about it. You can actually watch videos. You don't have to take my word for it. We have care partners who've been mentors and mentees, and they were kind enough to record testimonials about what it was actually like. And then you fill out a survey, kind of looks like this. And then you will get a call or an email from one of my two awesome coordinators working behind the scenes. And here's where we are. Actually, the slide is a little bit out of date. It's from last week. But we are recruiting 180 mentors from all across the country. We're just over 150. We got 30 spots left for mentors to join. And we are right around like the 350 mark of caregivers within that first 3 years, and we are aiming for 502. That's just how the statistics worked out. 502 care partners to be part of this. So if you are interested, if you know someone who is interested, please, please, please let us know, reach out, go to the website. Here's what that breakdown looks like. If you are in a state that is gray or light blue on this map, we really, really want to reach you. We really, really want representation and to make sure that we are getting resources to those who need it most. We know that the states that are gray are the states that often have 0 or 1 movement disorder specialist, that it's very hard to even get a diagnosis, let alone figure out about resources. So we really want to reach folks there. And why am I showing you this? So Lewy Body Dementia Association, Parkinson's Foundation, some of the other groups have been unbelievable partners. PMDA absolutely has been a partner in this and getting the word out. But this other group, the second most common reason people hear about us is from other care partners and support groups and webinars. So if you are part of other networks, if you know someone, if you go to a rock steady class with your loved one and there's a care partner sitting there who looks like they're pulling their hair out, you can share this with them. Please, thank you. Here are just some of the many logos of all of the awesome groups that are involved. So if it's helpful, we are now on TikTok and Instagram because our care partners who are part of our study team said, Jori, people are getting information about Parkinson's on TikTok and Instagram. And after my jaw got up off the floor, I realized, oh man, I guess we should be there too. So check us out for very silly videos of daily tips and tricks and life hacks and ways to try to make life a little bit easier. With all of that, here's what I hope I've communicated, is that folks with advanced Parkinson's, with late-stage Parkinsonism, are understudied and underrepresented in research, but amenable to clinical care and research, and they benefit from comprehensive care that can stabilize and even improve symptoms and quality of life, which means no one at any point is past the point of help. I will say it loud for those in the back. No one is past the point of help. Lewy body dementia is an umbrella term, and it covers Parkinson's dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies. These terms are super confusing to all of us, but recognizing that cognitive changes leads to better management today and in the future. And there's a lot of hope in the pipeline and things going on to make this better. What do we do today? Ooh, it's just going on its own. What do we do today if we're worried about cognitive change? Exercise. I don't care what kind. Exercise. That's the thing. Whatever you'll do, that's what to do. There are identifiable and potentially preventable or manageable causes of hospitalization in Parkinson's and Lewy body. So the takeaway there is any sudden change in your symptoms isn't usually Parkinson's. Think about infection, dehydration, and take action. Call your primary doc. Get checked for that UTI. We know that our Parkinson's and Lewy body family care partners, caregivers, have higher strain and burden than those caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease. Caregiver strain is common, it is real, you are not alone, and it is a risk factor for our loved ones winding up in the hospital and in nursing homes. But it is potentially modifiable with peer mentor-led educational intervention. And despite the fact that there is this high strain and burden, our caregivers, in the way that they are amazing in all other aspects too, will willingly share their invaluable lived experience and mentor newer caregivers on the journey who then improve their own knowledge and attitudes. So until our healthcare system changes, one of the biggest sources of caregiver support and wisdom is all of you, is connecting with others. And word of mouth referrals from one caregiver to another have been the main source of how we have been able to recruit for Persevere. So thank you. You are not alone. You know more than you think you do, and you can make this journey better for others who follow. So with that, I want to acknowledge my amazing teams. I want to acknowledge PMDA for this opportunity to speak with you all, my mentors and advisors, my mentees who help me be better. Those are my kiddos who always encourage me to look at tomorrow and how we make tomorrow a little bit brighter. And finally, those are my grandparents, the ones who I told you were a huge source of inspiration. And when I went into movement disorders, we had kind of all the other flavors of neurology in my family, but not movement disorders. Fast forward about a decade, and both were diagnosed with Parkinson's and then Lewy body. So not only do I see this on a daily basis in my own clinic, but I've seen this as a family member, and I see you. I appreciate our care partners and our people living this diagnosis, these diagnoses, and walking this walk so much more than I can even say. So just thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and happy to take questions. I'm sorry to talk so much.
We were rapt listening. We laughed, we cried, we were inspired. I mean, I've been to Broadway plays that were not as good as that talk. Thank you so much, Jori. That was an amazing presentation. And yeah, I think we have what you can do in the chat, how to take part in the study, and our online presentation. Um, so yeah, I'm like out of words. I'm just moved and inspired, and it was wonderful to listen about something you care so passionately about and are working so hard. So thank you, not just for this talk, but for everything that you do on behalf of all of us.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I was doing a brief pause to see if any questions came through, but I think everyone's like me. We're just ready to go sign off and get on that website and tell all our friends and take action. So thank you so much, Dr. Fleischer. Usually we do a wave of gratitude. I think we need to do a standing ovation of gratitude because this was just so amazing. So thank you to all of you who joined. Oh, there's Nancy. Nancy agrees.
Hey,
And,
Nancy.
and
It's always
Rick
good to see
and
friends.
yes, thank you so much. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. It was great to be with you all.
Thanks so much.